Hi, welcome back to Yogis on the Road. I'm Alexis. I'm here with Giuseppe and Guy Donahaye.
Hey.
Hi.
Today we have a unique episode. We're going to talk about kind of the structure of the Yoga Sutras and the correlation between certain parts in the first chapter and how that kind of moves throughout the rest of the book, which is a really dense and I would say almost a perfect text. But yeah, we're going to go into some terminology and discuss a little bit more of the complicated parts of the Yoga Sutras. So, I mean, maybe a place that we could begin is with the first verse of the second chapter, which is called the Sadhana Pada, where Patanjali lays out the sutra Tapa, Svadhyaya, Ishvara Pranidhana, Kriya Yogaha. So maybe we could talk briefly about the triangle of practices, Tapa, Svadhyaya, and Ishvara Pranidhana.
Okay, yeah. Maybe we just first speak a little bit about the relationship between the first and second chapter, and how he starts off the second chapter with this idea. So the first chapter is the Samadhi Pada, the chapter on Samadhi. And many people have pointed out over the years that there seem to be three different teachings for three different types of students in the Yoga Sutra. The first chapter, being the chapter on Samadhi, is for the adept student, the sattvic student, who doesn't need too much advice about how to enter into Samadhi. Here Patanjali says Abhyasa Vairagya and Ishvara Pranidhana. Abhyasa practice, Vairagya non-attachment, and surrender, Ishvara Pranidhana, surrender to the higher knowledge, a higher power.
Everybody got that. Done.
Well, these are repeated to a certain extent in the next chapter. So chapter 2, Vyasa starts off his commentary by saying, for those of an impure mind or those of a distracted mind, the second chapter is now given by Patanjali. This is called the Sadhana Pada, the chapter on practice. Sadhana means sort of integrated yoga practice. And he starts off by talking about Tapasvadhyaya and Ishvara Pranidhana as the three main principles. And then, as we spoke about last week, these three principles are again repeated in the section on Ashtanga Yoga, which is for the third type of student. So the second type of student is the one with a distracted mind, the Rajasic type student. And then the more tamasic, the more ignorant type, us Ashtanga people,
Yeah.
He explains these three principles as part of the overall Ashtanga system, as part of the niyamas, which is what we were talking about last week.
Yeah. So I mean, basically, the first chapter it's more with Vairagya and Abhyasa. You know, that's for the clear mind and people that have clarity on the path, and then for all of us who are very ignorant, we need something more specific with tools and instructions, and that's when it gets into the 8 limbs, and we have the yamas and the niyamas for the material world and the attachments and things like that.
And then the intermediate student is the one with the distracted mind, the Rajasic type, which is kind of what we're going to talk about today. So he starts off the second chapter by saying Tapasvadhyaya Ishvara Pranidhana Kriya Yogaha. And then he goes on to say, explain how these three principles cultivate the state of samadhi and reduce the afflictions. Just to reiterate, tapas means discipline or intense practice which purifies.
I've heard it translated as like a fire.
Yeah, tapa means to heat or to burn. So these are austerities or disciplines which purify the mind and body. Then svadhyaya, sva means self. Dhyaya comes from the root word of dhyana, which means meditation. So meditation on the self, or thinking about the true nature of the self, study of sacred texts, just educating yourself in terms of self-knowledge. And then the third principle, which is Ishvara Pranidhana, he goes into some depth in the first chapter explaining Ishvara Pranidhana as Ishvara as a pure spirit which has not incarnated, which has no afflictions, which has no suffering, which has no karmas. So the pure spirit, as opposed to the soul, which has gone through many lifetimes and has had all these different problems. So the inner being, the inner essence, surrender to the inner essence. Another way you could say, explain that as surrendering of the ego, surrendering of the small self to the higher self, to the pure self. And of course, the whole agenda of yoga is to identify that self, to that consciousness. So in the Sadhanapada, he starts off by speaking about these three principles as a means for attenuating or eliminating the klesha. And the klesha are 5 causes of affliction, 5 causes of suffering, which are, first one is avidya, which means ignorance, asmita, which means ego, raga, which means attachment, dvesha, which means aversion, and abhinivesha, which means the fear of death. I think we mentioned this before, but in Hindu philosophy, they love lists of categories, and always the very first one on the list is the most important. Just as the first principle of Ashtanga Yoga is ahimsa, everything else that follows is a kind of subcategory
of avidya.
Avidya, which means ignorance.
Vidya meaning truth, meaning
non-truth.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually vidya means to see. It comes from the saying, if you think about video, which is the Latin for to see, avidya means not seeing clearly. And it's not just ignorance about the fact that the planet Earth is round rather than flat. Such things as simple facts, but it's ignorance about the true nature of the human being, the true nature of the self, and the identification with these different layers of material or subtle nature because of a lack of awareness or lack of feeling for our true nature. So the first layer is simply avidya, ignorance about the nature of the self. And then the second is asmita, which means ego. So when we don't know who we are, we then start to project onto our minds and bodies, onto our things that we're attached to, such as our profession, such as our car or our clothing or whatever else we like to identify with. We say we identify with a gender, we identify with a particular sexuality, we identify with a particular profession, we identify as being a PhD or a MA or so many different labels we use, names that we use to identify with in having a lack of true knowledge about who we actually are, which according to yoga is pure consciousness. We are pure consciousness.
The tapas being the kind of burning away of the attachment. I wonder, what tapas would you say Patanjali is referring to that would help to clear out the kleshas?
The main meaning of tapas is food discipline. So that means not only what you eat, but when you eat, how much you eat. And as we said before, food is not just what you chew and swallow, but
right.
Food is everything you absorb through your senses. And one of the principal methods of discipline with regard to food is fasting. So fasting is a very, very effective way of disciplining the mind. strengthening the will and overcoming all kinds of addictions. It's a kind of muscle building for the mind.
Yeah. So like the tapas would be, it's more than just fasting from food. It'd be fasting from social media or fasting from speaking, like mauni.
Exactly. Maintaining silence is a very important principle.
Abstinence or renunciation of alcohol or drugs or things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the idea is against a certain resistance. It's not really discipline unless it's something you're kind of fighting against. If it's just easy, then we wouldn't really necessarily call it tapas. It is a discipline, but it comes naturally. And it does come naturally once you've made the effort to, we could say, purify yourself of those attachments.
I find that really interesting, that kind of sweet spot between being discomfort, like being uncomfortable and being in pain, like you said. Like we've talked about how people shouldn't go into an ashram and become celibate unless they don't feel like it anymore. And I think about the difference between tapas and vairagya, and to me it's always seemed like vairagya, it's like things naturally falling away, because once you realize, for example, that alcohol isn't really good for you anymore, that once you really realize it, it makes it kind of easier to not pick it up. But then there's also the tapas, which is like the burning away of the attachment, which is where you still have the craving. And I guess I wonder, how you would say to hold the differences in one's life. Like, where is it healthy and where is it not serving you anymore to do some sort of intense penance, some intense tapas?
Well, I think the idea of tapas is also, it's purifying. So it transforms you, it changes your mind, it changes your a tendency towards attachment. I'm sure a lot of people would say, well, alcohol's not so bad. And, it's really the addictive nature, the excessive consumption of things, which is the problem more than the thing. Although, alcohol is universally rejected according to yoga as something which dulls the mind. The main thing we're talking about with tapas is the purifying discipline. And of course, in Ashtanga yoga, I think a lot of people are using asana practice as a kind of tapas as well, a kind of discipline which burns away impurities in the mind and body.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think about even Ashtanga asana as a form of kind of self-study. Like, I've been thinking about this a lot lately because, like you said, if you stay out late and you eat junk food and then you go to practice in the morning and you feel nauseous, then it's a direct knowledge of the impact of attachments on the body. And then through that, the wisdom dawns that this is not healthy. Whereas perhaps in other forms of asana that I have been around in the West with people kind of, like loud music playing and people listening to a teacher follow a sequence that they have constructed, that sometimes it's hard to hear my own body and hear my own breath, and it's not as effective as the Ashtanga asana system.
Well, I think two things that are unique about the Ashtanga approach. One is it's a daily practice, and that's how, to a certain extent, it falls under the category of tapas discipline, whereas just going to attend a class is a bit more like going for some relaxation, probably. Right. The second thing is doing the same asana practice every day. It gives you a consistent mirror for, or maybe not mirror, but gives you a consistent sort of benchmark against which to measure the ups and downs that you experience depending on the kind of food that you've eaten, how much you slept, whether you got into an argument just before you came to practice, all these different variations that happen in your mind and body. If you're doing the same physical practice, you can trace those changes and begin to understand, as you say, you're beginning to get some self-knowledge through that about what is beneficial, what's not beneficial. In a way, this is not really svadhyaya in the sense that it's not telling you about yourself. It's telling you about the elements that you're introducing, which are unhealthy, which, they're categorized and all presented there in the yogic literature. It's just that because we tend to be attached to what we like, and this comes up in the next section, the next of the klesha, which is raga, attachment. He says about raga, about desire, passion, attachment, that we follow what gives us pleasure, and that we invest those things that give us pleasure with only pure values. We see it as pure, even though it may have an impure impact on us. So we get blinded, just as, when you enjoy the alcohol, the drug, or food, or whatever item it is that's giving you a kind of pleasure, but an unhealthy pleasure, we don't mention any of the negative side effects. We see the pure in the pure in the impure. So as long as we feel attached to those food items that give us a certain pleasure, we do not acknowledge that they're actually causing us pain, even though it may say in the Yoga Sutra or the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, you shouldn't eat tamasic food, you shouldn't eat rajasic food, because it has a negative impact on you. But I like that impact that it has on me.
Sometimes I think about that. It's like interesting because if you sort of enjoy that kind of food, or if you enjoy drinking and nobody has shown you what's on the other side of that, you don't know the point of reference in a way. Like a lot of people, since it's so deeply rooted in society, you go out, then you drink, then you eat, and then you go to sleep, then you go to work the morning after. It's sort of like hard for maybe a lot of people to be exposed to an alternative sort of lifestyle. So sometimes you don't even think that there might be an alternative, but the alternative is there.
Right. You can't really know something unless you experience it. So, when you are totally absorbed in a particular type of behavior or food or lifestyle, then it's impossible really to know how it would be different, except that you can see some people maybe in your life who have gone that route, and you can see what marvelous changes have happened in them. And as we were just mentioning, when you do start these practices and you still have the attachment to those things, that you notice in your asana practice or your meditation practice, after a heavy night of drinking, that you just fall asleep in meditation, or after eating certain types of food, you have a lot of pain in your body, your digestive system is not working very well, you feel heavy, or you feel pain, and so this is a sort of way of learning through tapas.
Yeah. It's like trial and error, basically.
Yeah.
You see what happens and then you adjust based on that.
Yeah, error and trial.
Yeah, true.
The trial of errors.
Yeah. I remember one time, I don't know if I said it already, but like one time it was my friend's birthday. So I had like this cake that was like super sweet. And then the morning after a practice, my whole thing was just going up and down. It's like sugars, you have like, you crush, then the energy goes up, and then you crush again. And it's like, wow. Like something like that can really, like everything affects you.
Sure.
It's just as most of the time we're not so in tune with our system.
Yeah, I think we also, we're so polluted. Not just by food, but by all kinds of environmental factors, that even though, even if you eat well for 3 or 4 days, you may not really notice that much difference, because for the last 15 years,
Yeah.
you've been, your body has been filled up with all this crap,
Yeah,
or
definitely.
other factors, in spite of the fact you're eating well, you have a very, very toxic relationship, which is causing you so much
Yeah.
stress and pain and so on, that just eating well doesn't necessarily make you feel that much better, because there's so many other things, or you eat well, but you're taking heroin,
Yeah.
you probably wouldn't notice the difference, So, yeah, and it's a process, it doesn't happen overnight.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think about the tapas of my asana practice and how that has informed my self-realization, and the amount of times I've spent ruminating on some conversation and like forgotten what I'm doing. And I think it's a really insightful thing to learn. That's something that I've learned is, it helps me to notice when I'm attached to something, then I lose my own presence of my being. And that's an example, I guess, of toxic ingestion of food, but the food is people. Conversation.
Yeah, I think asana practice is not necessarily tapasic. It depends on how you're working with it. If you have a kind of sense of intense discipline, or if it requires intense discipline to do it. And I think it's also a little bit of a stretch. Tapas is really more about discipline, and not so much about hanging out in the asanas. And I think what's interesting, what you're referring to perhaps, is something a little bit different, which is also a very interesting topic of conversation, which is, I believe that, every time you think something or feel something, it gets sort of imprinted in your body.
Yeah.
That the fascia of the body actually holds emotion. And
I agree with you.
When you stretch out some part of your body which has been blocked or restricted by an intense feeling, then there's a release, and suddenly you're thinking about something which seems irrelevant to your asana practice, but it just comes up,
Oh my God, that's so true.
Yeah. I think especially in the beginning, you're doing a sun salutations, it's almost like your dreams are coming to you in your practice. You don't know where it's coming from. Your unconscious is releasing all these memories. So I think that's something a little bit different.
I hear what you're saying. That's happened to me too. But there's also just like, I was referring to like the tapas of doing the same thing every day, and then you come in and it's like, I had an argument with my coworker or something, and then that like blurs into my practice the next morning. But what you're talking about, it's almost like I don't know if I'm thinking correctly. It's like the svadhyaya in a sense, because these old things are like unlocked in the body.
Yeah, again, I think it's a little stretch of the word svadhyaya, but definitely it's a form of self-knowing. Really, svadhyaya means being able to distinguish between pure consciousness
Ishvara.
and the body-mind complex. So, it's in a way it's the release of the ego attachment to the body. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains this body as a kind of vehicle, or you can think of it as a sort of item of clothing. It is not the self. We attach to this body, we attach to this vehicle, but it's just a vehicle, And when the car gets rusty, you take it to the scrapyard and junk it, and you buy a new body. The body is finished with. You get a new body, and attachment to it is really the problem.
So what's this? That's what I was thinking about right now. It's like, what's the step between knowing this, with your brain, and experiencing it? How do you bridge the two types of like knowledge in a way? Like, we talked about that. So it's okay, the body-mind complex versus your pure consciousness. Okay, they're there. What is the step that people, that somebody should take to sort of experience this, as opposed to just theory?
Yeah, you could say that yoga is a different way of knowing. It's the transformation of mind so that you can know and see something in a different way. When the body and mind are polluted, then the capacity for knowledge is not there. They act as either rajasic, distracting elements, or tamasic, veiling, covering up elements. And through our conditioning, through our projection of certain ideas on this, oh yes, I understand this theory, these things stand in our way.
Because that itself is basically being stuck in the mind. If you say, yeah, I understand the theory, you're still in the mind. You'd sort of...
If you understood the theory correctly, that would be sufficient. But just to say, yeah, I understand the theory, sort of also indicates a certain kind of, ego.
Yeah.
A certain kind of pride. Asmita, yes. So, yoga, samadhi is a whole new way of experiencing. It requires the complete transformation of body and mind into a new condition. It's not intellectual knowledge.
Yeah.
You can't get to yoga through study. Or through intellect.
Exactly. That's
only through transformation of the self, or transformation of the body and mind.
Wow.
So, if you have passion, raga, if you have attachment to ideas, attachment to notions of yourself, attachment to how clever we are, that we can make this distinction, that I know I am a pure spirit, as opposed to all these concepts and perceptions of my body. And if you also then are able to eliminate your aversions, which is dvesha, which is the next klesha, the next affliction. Dvesha means what you reject because it causes you pain. So when you don't get what you want, when you don't have the thing that gives you pleasure or that makes you feel good, then you feel pain, and the action to reject that is called dvesha. Sometimes they call it anger. They'll say anger is dvesha. So we all have these kind of prejudices in the way we think and the way we understand and how we talk about ourselves, and these color are true knowledge, and then the fifth affliction is called abhinivesha, which means the fear of death, or you could say fear, period.
Yeah.
But according to yoga, the fear of death is the fundamental cause of all fears. So again, we reject certain ideas because they are too scary. What would it take for you to sit quietly in a room and eliminate all thinking, eliminate all feeling, eliminate all attachments, all memories? It would take a certain fearlessness, and a lot of people, they can't deal even with silence. There has to be noise constantly, whether it's talking, or whether it's the TV, or whether it's music. Or people can feel very uncomfortable with pure silence.
Can you explain how how you see the fear of silence as going essentially to the fear of death? Is it because people aren't talking, and talking is an expression of your ego? Is that how you look at it? I think that's really interesting.
I'm not sure, really. I think for most people, the idea of death is complete annihilation, complete silence, complete nothingness, complete darkness. Whereas according to yoga, it's something very, very different. They even say so-and-so attained their samadhi when they die.
Yeah.
And samadhi means the opposite of death. It means death of the body, but it means life of the spirit, And so there's the feeling amongst many people that when you die, you'll just get extinguished. And to a certain extent, that's true, because your ego, your body, this mind, they all they all fall to pieces. They all dissolve. They all disintegrate. They get eaten by worms. But what we're aiming to find in yoga is the pure spirit, it's pure consciousness. And most people feel that when they die, they will cease to exist. And which makes the agenda of yoga even more pressing, even more attractive. If you think about it, yoga says that this mind, body, and all the thoughts, memories, experiences, etc., are all a kind of illusion. They're not really real. They're just like, it's just like being in a movie theater, watching a show. But what is real is the person who's watching the show. And you forget yourself while you're in the movie theater. But when you leave, you realize that was just all, it was a horror movie, but it wasn't real, And life is sort of similar, that actually it's all good, even though it looks...
Actually, it's all good.
It all looks horrible.
My movie was actually a musical. It wasn't a horror movie. I chose a musical for this incarnation.
Oh, pretty cool.
Right, yeah. You're watching The Sound of Music, and for me, that would be a torture, worse than a horror movie. We each have our own hell, our own idea of hell.
Yeah, totally.
We all are in it. Yeah.
Cool. So
And these
why
are
is
ways-
it hard to accept it?
Why is it hard to accept?
That at some point then your body and your mind and dissolves and you walk out of the movie theater.
I mean, that's the avidya.
Why, you just, say to people, that's what happens. And
We've developed very strong attachments through the ignorance. So the root cause of all the afflictions is ignorance.
So not knowing
ignorance about the true nature. So if we knew, if I know I am pure consciousness, and I know that this mind and body are just temporary ripples in this universe, then I have no problem just observing those ripples, those ups and downs. Whereas since we have lost that understanding, we become very attached to those ripples, those elements of mind and body, become very attached to them, and they become very familiar, and we can't let go of them. Just like children, young children, when they have to go to sleep at night, they cry.
Yeah.
Sleep is the most beautiful thing. It's wonderful to sleep, and yet they fear to lose what they've become attached to during the daytime, and they've forgotten that bliss, sleep is blissful.
And then tomorrow you wake up and it's like,
and we all
still
cry.
there.
We're all crying all the time, or finding ways to, if you feel like you want to cry, then go have some chocolate or some ice cream, or go for a run, or go and shout at somebody, or do something egoistic. So we become very attached. We've lost the connection with who we are, and we've become so connected to who we're not. We can't let it go.
How do you spread this message for all people to know, in a way?
I guess doing podcasts.
Listen to our podcast. No.
Maybe 100 people will listen. It's kind of precious knowledge that is not accessible or not attractive.
Yeah, I mean, honestly,
to the vast majority of people.
Capitalism.
You have to be ready to hear truth. And if you're not ready for it, then you won't even notice it's being spoken. So, there's only few people who are really serious about the path, and they will listen, and they will hear, and they will find their way. And the vast majority, unfortunately, are in a deep suffering and misery of materialism.
Yeah, it's a tricky business. It's
Yeah, samsara. It is. It's very tricky.
yeah, it's sort of like, yeah, like you say, the vast majority of us is, yeah, struggling with these concepts in a way, or a lot of people don't even know that something like this might exist. But sometimes I even think like kids that grow up in a war environment, and they, I don't know, that's just what they've been exposed to their whole childhood. It's difficult to imagine that, you know, in that kind of condition, you start evolving or start thinking about these kind of matters.
Yeah, so, but maybe it's exactly what would make you move towards it. I mean, when you see the starkness, when you see death, and, you know, you're exposed to that radical experience, then maybe it pushes you much more strongly in that direction. Whereas if you're just sitting in front of your TV, eating your Big Mac and having your 32-ounce shake, then
McFlurry.
You're much more likely just to be in a kind of haze of ignorance. So I think sometimes stark reality actually gives the spur to finding deeper meaning. You know, why is there suffering? You have to ask yourself when you experience those kind of things. So
the worst would be sort of just being in this haze of like comfort and really just not trying to go beyond your...
That's the general condition. And, you know, people also, their attachments, their projection onto those things, their attachments prevent them from exploring these ideas, you know.
Yeah, and then we get tangled up in, you know, okay, tomorrow I got to do this at work and this and this and that. And then you finish office and then you go out drinking and eating. And there is never time just to be your clear, sober self. Sober, not just from drinking, but like in a more 360 degrees. Like,
of course, that's the beauty of practicing yoga. It may not initially be all about trying to achieve realization. It may just be you want to relax or you want to work out or something. But when you carve out that hour or 2 hours a day where you're just focusing on something different from your daily attachments, then you create space and you start to think and you start to go deeper.
Yeah, and then I like the fact that it's like, it's just you. It's, you know, you have to eventually, you know, when you're in the room and then you're working through all the asanas, it's, nobody can do it for you. Or if, you know, if you don't want to do it, then you go away. But it's, if you got to do it, it's just you, you know?
Yeah, that's a really important piece of it. Again, that's what I see. That's how I see it as self-study. You know, nobody's going to teach me how to walk. I have to do it on my own.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it also reveals to you all your, you know, your likes and dislikes. So you like this asana, or you're attached to this particular practice, or you want to achieve that goal. And you also experience your disappointments. We talked about that when you got injured.
Yeah.
How that was quite a realization, and made you think about why am I practicing asanas in the first place? Is it just to achieve this? And so, you know, asana practice is a kind of little laboratory for life. And you observe all your, you know, you may observe your fear. You may feel unstable in a particular kind of pose. You may feel unstable going upside down. You may feel fear. You may feel insecurity. You may feel all kinds of things. Or a rush of pleasure or desire or attachment, which then afterwards may turn into misery or disappointment and so on. So it's a way of truly knowing yourself with a small s, your
Yeah.
ego. How is your ego operating? How is
True.
your ego operating in relation to your body, in relation to what you want to do with your body? And this is extremely valuable, obviously, in being able to get some detachment from those ideas and to stand back and just sort of see yourself more objectively.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I also see, for instance, like the attachment to results. It's like everything in marketing is about results. Get ripped in 8
Goal.
weeks if you do this program, and or make $50,000 if you do. It's everything is always about like achieving a specific result. And
Well, it's not just marketing, it's our culture. In America, certainly, it's all about results.
Yeah.
People love talking about their achievements and even their experiences, which also results. Did you have a fantastic time? Are you really excited about this? Are you, are you having an extreme positive experience? These are results.
Yeah.
And if you had a disappointing time or something made you upset, then people generally don't want to hear about it. That's not the result they want to hear.
Yeah.
They want to hear superlatives. They want to hear you're getting ahead. They want to hear that you're making progress, etc., etc. So it's a very result-oriented culture.
yeah, if you're in California, you cannot have a bad day. It's like if you're in Los Angeles, there's no way that you can have a bad day, or even a medium. It has to be great.
Whereas in New York, if you're having a bad day, it's actually a good day.
Yeah, it's like, you're in New York,
You got really mad about something. It's like
it's
a positive
New York.
experience.
Yeah, I think about New York and I'm like, oh, New York is my teacher of Dvesha because of the amount of ambulances that are rolling by me every day help me to work through my aversions. And like police sounds going off and car alarms. I'm like, oh, yay, Santosha, I can cultivate an attitude of contentment.
Yeah. So these were the Kleshas, right?
These are the Kleshas, yes. So ignorance about the true nature of reality.
Avidya.
That's the fundamental idea in yoga. We're trying to get this true knowledge or experience of consciousness. We've lost that, which has caused us immense suffering. We don't know who we are anymore, so we then project and attach ourselves to all these different types of phenomena, whether it's experience,
Career.
whether it's our body, whether it's our mind, whether it's our profession, many, many different types of projections and attachments. Then we also enjoy pleasure, and we also run away from pain, and we also have the fear of death. Because being attached to this body, being attached to this mind, we fear losing. We enjoy experiencing instead of being content or feeling at peace to just sit quietly and be with ourselves. If we are spending that time being with ourselves, it's nourishing in a very deep way. Just as sleep is so important. According to yoga, there are 4 different states of consciousness. There's the waking state, there's the dream state, there's the deep sleep state, and then there's the 4th state. Turiya is actually called the 4th state, which is samadhi. And according to yoga, everybody has the capacity to, or should, if they're healthy, experience all 4 states. In fact, according to Ayurveda, a healthy person experiences all 4 states, including samadhi. So it's our birthright. It's a natural phenomenon, just like sleep. And just as when we lose sleep, we become unhealthy, we feel sick. In the same way, through not experiencing samadhi, through not experiencing pure consciousness, through not experiencing ourselves as we are, we become sick, we become afflicted. And so the purpose of yoga is to overcome this ignorance of not knowing who we are. And the 4 other afflictions are subcategories of that, because we have this attachment to the body and to pleasure, and we develop this kind of addictions to food and to music and to company and noise and etc. And we can't sit with silence and quiet and peace. We don't know how to find it. We're trying to find it through other things. We even think that we're going to find that peace and pleasure through material objects. And we do to some extent, and then those pleasures go away, and then they turn to dvesha, they turn to misery, because we can't sustain them.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. We spend a whole lifetime going through this.
Kleshas, the musical. My lifetime.
Cool. Well, thanks, guys. So, yeah, see you next time. What do we have planned for next week? Are we going to go ahead and keep on
I think we're gonna complete the Ashtanga yoga. So I think we'll go into asana, and then afterwards to pranayama, and so on.
Okay, cool. It's going to be interesting. Right.
Yeah. Thanks, you guys.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
See you next week.